One. Hare Krishna. Is my screen visible? Oh. Okay, we'll start with the Mangala channel. Om Majnana Timirandasya, Jnananjana Shalakaya, Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guru Nama, Sri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale, Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam, Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Yudapatakalam, Sri Gurun Vaishnavasya, Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Stam Sajivam, Sadvaitam Saudutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamsya. हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपीशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमस्ते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये पंचकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिंधुभ्यः च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय Hare Krishna. So today we'll look at verse 31 of the 11th chapter of first canto. So we'll start with reciting the verse. Patnya patim prosya grhanupakadam vilokya sanjata mano mahotsava uttasthurarat sahasranashayat sakam ritairvidita lochanana patnya patim prosya grhanupagatam vilokya sanjata mano mahotsava uttasthurarat sahasranashayat sakam ritairvidita lochanana patnya patim prosya grhanupagatam vilokya sanjata mano mahotsava uttasthurarat sahasranashayat sakam ritairvidita lochanana patnya pratim prosya grhanupagatam vilokya sanjata mano mahotsava uttasthurarat sahasranashayat sakam ritairvidita lochanana. Anyone want to try recite the verse? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
That's what I think.
Patnya patim prosya garhanupagatang vilokya sanjata mano mahotsavaha uttastur arat sahasanashya shayat shakam vratair vriddita lochana.
Thank you, Mataji. Anyone else?
Can I try, Prabhu?
Okay.
Patnya patim prosyagram pagatam vilosya sanjata mano mahosatva uttasaru arat shashasyat Sakam Prajatra Vidutri Lokanaha.
Okay, thank you, Ru. Anyone else?
If I'm wrong, sorry, Prabhu.
It's okay, Ru. Okay, so we'll proceed with the synonyms, word by word meanings. Patnya, the ladies, wives of Lord Sri Krishna. Patim, husband. Prosya, who was away from home. Griha Anupagatam, now returned home. Vilokya, thus seeing. Sanjata, having developed. Mana Maha Utsava, a sense of joyful ceremony within the mind. Uttastuhu, got up. Arat, from a distance. Sahasa, all of a sudden. Asana, from the seats. Ashayat, from the state of meditation. Sakam, along with Ratain, the vow. Ridita, looking coyly. Lochana, eyes. Anana, with such faces. Translation: the queens of Lord Sri Krishna rejoiced within their minds to see their husband home after a long period abroad. The queens got up at once from their seats and meditations, as was socially customary. They covered their faces shyly and looked about coyly. So in this chapter is about Krishna's arrival in Dwaraka. So in the previous chapter, chapter 10 was regarding his departure from Hastinapur. Now he has arrived in Dwaraka, and there are actually 40 verses in this chapter. So we have covered 30 verses so far, and there are 10 more to go. And even in this chapter, quite similar to the previous chapter, even in this chapter, it's talking about the ecstasy of all the residents of Dwaraka upon seeing Krishna. Upon his arrival, once they saw Krishna, all the residents of Dwaraka, even his family members, the Yaduvanshis, they were all very elated to see him. And so the experiences of all the residents and the family members were described earlier in the earlier verses of the chapter. And now the descriptions are about how the wives of Krishna, the 16,108 wives, the queens of Dwarka, how they were feeling after seeing him. So here in this text 30, it is mentioned Sahasrani Cha Sodasa. So 16,108 wives. So from verse 30 onwards, the description of the queens, the wives of Krishna, about their reactions after seeing him return home. So these verses talk about how they felt after seeing him. As mentioned above, the Lord entered his home palaces occupied by 16,108 queens. This means that the Lord at once expanded himself in as many plenary expansions as there were queens and palaces, and entered in each and every one of them simultaneously and separately. Even in the Goloka chart, we have actually seen in some of our previous sessions during our thematic studies. So in the Goloka chart, we can see that there are three main divisions in the Goloka chart. The topmost one is the Goloka region, then Vaikunta region, and the Devi Dham. So Krishna's original form, his Swayamrupa, is shown in Goloka Vrindavana, the topmost form. His Swayamrupa, the original personality of Godhead. And then we can actually see how the expansions are, how the various expansions are formed. Even within the Goloka region, there are three main divisions: Vrindavana, Mathura, and Dwarka. So in all those regions, we can actually see how the Swayam Bhagavan expanded himself into many expansions, and he was simultaneously engaged in all his pastimes in all the different dhams, namely Vrindavan, Mathura, and Dwarka. So even in the spiritual world itself, the original personality of Godhead, Swayam Bhagavan, he actually has expanded himself into various expansions, and he's always eternally engaged in his pastimes in all the different dhams within the spiritual world itself. So from the Goloka region, the first Adi Chaturvyuha expansion is formed, and then it proceeds to the Vaikuntha region. There, with all the innumerable Narayana forms are there for the innumerable Vaikuntha planets. And then the Dvitiya Chaturyuha, the secondary Chaturyuha is formed, and the secondary Shankarshan becomes the spark for the avatars which are formed in the Devidam, the material world. So in the Goloka region, when Krishna expands himself into the various expansions from Vrindavana, he is there, he resides in Vrindavana as Swayam Bhagavan in his original form, and then the expansions are formed from Vrindavana to Mathura, and then they further expand into bigger and more numerous forms in Dwaraka. So this expansion of into the 16,000 forms is known as the Prabhava, the thing, it's the Vaibhava Vilasa. So even within the spiritual world, apart from Goloka, even between the Goloka and Vaikuntha regions, Ayodhya Dham is there in between. So the expansion of Krishna is also present in the form of Lord Rama in Ayodhya Dham. So even there, he is present in his separate expansion, and he's engaged in all his pastimes simultaneously. So similarly, in Dwaraka Dham, Krishna's 16,000 expansions were simultaneously existing in all his 16,000 palaces with these 16,000 queens. Actually, this is quite often, it appears to be like a somewhat controversial or kind of a disputed topic whenever it comes to discussions related to Krishna. But what people normally say, normally the non-devotees, they often compare this with the mundane polygamy concept in the material world. So this is why even Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita in 18.67, Krishna says, Idam tena tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana, nacha sususave vakyam nacha mamyo bisuyati. So even in the Bhagavad Gita, after conveying all the important knowledge to Arjuna, from 18.67, Krishna says, this knowledge should not be communicated, should not be conveyed with non-devotees. But in 18.68, Krishna says that Ya idam paramam guyam mat bhakti sabdasati bhakti mai param kritva mame vaishasya samshaya. In 18.67, Krishna says that this knowledge should not be conveyed to those non-devotees who are not austere, not faithful to me. But in the very next verse, he says that those who convey this knowledge to my devotees, they are very dear to me. So it is as simple as that. Krishna is saying that this transcendental knowledge should not be conveyed to non-devotees simply because they don't have the capacity to understand it. So they will always keep concocting and with their limited vision, they won't be able to understand this transcendental knowledge. So that's why they often often the non-devotees, the so-called self-proclaimed rationalists and atheists, they often compare this with the polygamous concept of the mundane world. It is clearly stated in these descriptions from the Bhagavatam that Krishna was always existing in all the 16,000 palaces simultaneously. So only the devotees who have actually studied the scriptures in depth, in detail, only they can understand. Normally what happens is that all these self-proclaimed rationalists and atheists who call themselves atheists, but they only their only agenda is to attack Sanatana Dharma, though they say that they are against all other religions. They don't have guts to attack other religions other than Sanatana Dharma, because they know what happens if they even try to attack other religions. So they always spread their propaganda without even understanding what is there in our authentic scriptures. It is clearly explained here that Krishna was simultaneously existing in 16,000 expansions. So the source of that expansion, how the various expansions are formed, are there in the Goloka chart. So when those half-baked intellectuals, they are not able to understand this transcendental knowledge because they don't even care to study the scriptures from bona fide sampradayas. They are not even able to identify the authentic scriptures. So they always tend to spread their propaganda as they are instructed by their paymasters. But devotees will always be able to understand, because that's what Krishna himself says in the Gita in 10.10, where he says that as devotees endeavor to understand him, he himself will also reciprocate by revealing the knowledge. So in our sampradaya, thanks to our acharyas and Srila Prabhupada himself, he has given the cream of the entire knowledge of the sampradaya. The purports written by Prabhupada are not merely his composition. He has actually given the essence of all the commentaries written by the earlier acharyas. So all the in-depth details are available in Prabhupada's purports. So here we can clearly understand that in Dwarakadham, Krishna was always existing in his 16,000 expansions, and he was interacting personally with all his queens in all the 16,000 palaces. So that transcendental interaction cannot be compared with the mundane notion of polygamy in this material world. So there is no comparison. And the fact that he was able to exist in 16,000 palaces and also provide for 16,000 queens, that itself shows how Krishna was able to exhibit all his opulences in full when he was even present in this material world. So the subject matter that we are studying in Bhagavatam is actually about the avatara of Krishna. It is about the pastimes which happened when Krishna descended to this material world. So that's why they are called avatara. In the spiritual world, even there from the Swayam Rupa of Krishna, there are many expansions, but those are known as expansions. But even in Srila Prabhupada's purports, he often uses the term expansion. He rarely uses the term avatar or incarnation, unless when the discussion is related to the material world. So even in Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 3, the title is Krishna is the source of all incarnations. So the subject matter of Bhagavatam, which we are studying, is all related to the pastimes of Krishna when he was present in this material world. But the same pastimes are also happening in the spiritual world. So even while being in this material world, Krishna was never subject to any of the laws of material nature. He was able to exhibit his all his six opulences in abundance, in full. So as we know, in Gita, uh, in the second verse, Gita 2.2, Krishna starts to speak for the first time. So the verse starts with Sri Bhagavan Vacha. So in the purport for Gita 2.2, Srila Prabhupada explains regarding the definition of the term Bhagavan. So the purport is divided into two halves. In the first half, Srila Prabhupada explains about the definition of Bhagavan in the context of the three levels of realization of the absolute truth. So the three levels are impersonal Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So in the first half of the purport for Gita 2.2, Srila Prabhupada talks about the definition of Bhagavan according to that context. And then in the second half of the purport, Prabhupada explains about the definition of Bhagavan according to the criteria set by Parasara Muni based on the six opulences, namely wealth, strength, beauty, fame, knowledge, renunciation. So Krishna has all these six opulences in abundance, unlimited. So even when he descended to the material world, he had all these opulences in full, all the six opulences, and he was able to exhibit these opulences. For example, about Krishna's beauty, Krishna was present in this material world for 125 years. But even at the time of his disappearance, even when the Mahabharata war happened, and after that, when he disappeared from the material world, he was still looking like a youth, though he was actually at the age of 125 years. Similarly, in Dwaraka Dham itself, he was able to maintain 16,000 palaces, and he was present in the form of 16,000 expansions simultaneously with all his queens. So that is the difference between the transcendental behavior of the Supreme Lord, and it cannot be compared with the mundane notion of polygamy in the material world. So there's simply no comparison. So devotees who endeavor to understand these transcendental topics by studying in depth, they can easily understand, not the half-baked intellectuals who call themselves as atheists. So they have their agenda. So they'll always act according to the agenda set by their pay masters. So they'll always be they're always hell-bent on distorting all these topics of transcendence. They don't even care about studying the authentic scriptures, so they can never understand. So that's why Krishna himself says in Gita 18.67 that the transcendental teachings should not be conveyed to non-devotees, simply because they cannot understand. And no matter how much we try to explain to them, they'll never be convinced, because they have their agenda set by their pay masters. He can expand himself in as many forms of spiritual identity as he desires. Even though he is one without a second, it is confirmed by the Shruti mantra that the absolute is one alone, and yet he becomes many as soon as he so desires. These manifold expansions of the Supreme Lord are manifested as plenary and separated portions. The separated portions are representations of his energy, and the plenary portions are manifestations of his personality. The easiest analogy by which we can understand this concept of plenary expansions is like the lighting of ghee lamps, for example. If we light normally in for most of the festivals, in the temples especially, we light the ghee lamps but we light the ghee lamp using the lamp from the altar. So normally for festivals, we light up to hundreds or even thousands of lamps for every day. So when we light up all those thousands of lamps, the lamps are all similar. They are very similar, just like the altar lamp. However, the altar lamp has its special position. So similarly, when we talk about these plenary expansions of Krishna, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who resides in Goloka Vrindavan as Swayam Bhagavan, he is like the altar lamp. But all his expansions, just like Lord Rama, Narasimha, and even the other expansions, his Vaibhava expansions, all these other expansions are similar to the various ghee lamps. So they are similar, but still Swayam Bhagavan is supreme. These manifold expansions of the Supreme Lord are manifested as plenary and separated portions. The separated portions are representations of his energy, and the plenary portions are manifestations of his personality. Thus, the personality of Godhead manifested himself in 16,108 plenary expansions and simultaneously entered into each and every one of the palaces of the queens. So clearly we can understand that there were 16,000 palaces, and Krishna was present in all these palaces, personally interacting with his queens. This is called Vaibhava, or the transcendental potency of the Lord. And because he can do so, he is also known as Yogeshwara. Ordinarily, a yogi or mystic living being is able to expand himself at most to tenfold expansions of his body. But the Lord can do so to the extent of as many thousands or infinitely as he likes. So even when we talk about the pastimes of Krishna in Dwaraka, in Dwaraka town, whether it is in the material world or even in the spiritual world, if we follow the chronology of Bhagavatam, before the emergence of Kali Yuga, before the disappearance of Lord Krishna from this material world, he was present in Dwaraka town in 16,000 expansions in his 16,000 palaces. However, it is just an example. He expanded himself into those expansions to serve his devotees who were actually the queens. So they were able to attain the status of the queens of Dwaraka due to their the tapasya which they have accumulated in their past lives. So they were qualified to attain that status. And he merely expanded himself into 16,000 expansions merely to serve those queens who are also his topmost devotees. However, it is not that Krishna can only expand himself to 16,000 expansions. He can expand himself into innumerable expansions. For example, even when we talk about the Mahatattva expansion, we know the three main forms of expansions which happen with the creation of the Mahatattva, beginning from Mahavishnu. Then we have Garbhodakashaya Vishnu. Garbhodakashaya Vishnu is there in each one universe, but throughout the Mahatattva, there are innumerable material universes. So from Mahavishnu, he expands himself into the innumerable Garbhodakashaya Vishnu expansions. And even from there, he expands himself into the Shirodakashaya Vishnu expansions into each living entity. So that is the inexhaustible potency of Bhagavan. He can expand himself into as many portions as he wishes, and it all depends on the purpose, because even when we talk about the expansions or the avatars, there are different categories. So there are Leela avatars. Even in the Leela avatars, Lord Rama is actually, he is very similar to Bhagavan Krishna, but his purpose was different. He was meant to be in a human form. It was not like Lord Rama did not really unleash all his opulences like Krishna did, because when Krishna descended, he descended with all his opulences completely, and he exhibited all those opulences. But the purpose of the appearance of Lord Rama was different, because Ravana never thought that a human being could pose any threat to him. So Lord Rama took the form of a normal human being. However, it is not like Lord Rama is inferior to Krishna. No, it was just that the magnitude of the opulences were used as needed for the purpose of that avatara. So Krishna can expand himself infinitely, as mentioned here, as he likes. Unbelievers become astonished to learn that Lord Krishna married more than 16,000 queens, because they think of Lord Krishna as one of them and measure the potency of the Lord by their own limited potency. So this is the limitation with the limitation of the mortal human beings in this material world. Even when we talk about devotees, even devotees who come across this topic maybe for the first time, even they might not be able to understand regarding this topic. But as we study in depth, and if we follow the authentic scriptures, we can easily understand how the various expansions are formed, and we simply cannot view this transcendental topic based on our limited and narrow-minded vision from the perspective of this material world. We cannot compare the mundane material world's notion of polygamy with this transcendental pastime of Krishna, because it is clearly stated here that Krishna was simultaneously present in all his palaces. So even if we look at the example of Malaysia, we know that the new Istana Negara was inaugurated a few years back. Before that, there was another Istana Negara. So even the king of Malaysia cannot exist in two palaces at the same time. When the new palace was ready, he moved to the new palace. And even in the state of Perak, our royal city is Kuala Kangsar. So the palace is actually there. But even here, they have another palace in Ipoh called Istana Kinta. So even the Sultan, the ruler of Perak, he cannot exist in both the palaces at the same time. So that's why we cannot understand this topic, this transcendental topic of Krishna, based on our mundane viewpoint, viewed from the perspective of this material world. So this is a problem even for devotees who often endeavor to understand the subject matters of authentic scriptures. So the non-devotees, who are often the so-called rationalists and atheists, who have their own agenda. So for sure, even they, they cannot understand it. One should know, therefore, that the Lord is never on the level of the living beings, who are but expansions of his marginal potency. And one should never equalize the potent and the potency, although there is very little difference of quality between the potent and the potency. So it is mentioned here that the living beings are expansions of his marginal potency. So we know that even in the Gita, that Krishna talks about his inferior material energy in Gita 7.4. Then in 7.5, he talks about his marginal energy, because we as the conditioned souls, though we are originally spirit souls who are part of Krishna's superior spiritual energy, since we are trapped in this material world, despite our original identity of being part of Krishna's spiritual energy, we are still subject to the material energy of Krishna. We are trapped in between. So we are known as the marginal energy or Tatastha Shakti. So we are trapped in between. So if we desire to regain our original identity, to be part and parcel of Krishna's superior spiritual energy, meaning to go back to the spiritual world, then we have to endeavor much harder because the effect of the material energy is so strong. Srila Prabhupada often uses the analogy of tug of war, where both the material energy of Devidam is also pulling the conditioned souls towards it. So no matter how much we as devotees, though we may try to elevate ourselves to the spiritual world, still the effect of the material energy is still so strong. So that's why even Krishna also clarifies in Gita 7.14 that though the material energy is so strong, but conditioned souls can easily cross over the effect of material existence simply by surrendering to him. As Krishna says in Gita 7.14, there is very little difference of quality between the potent and the potency. So we as living beings, we are part of his marginal potency, but he is the potent. It is just like the difference between the energy and the energetic. So the sun is the source of energy and the sun is the energetic, but he diffuses the energy emanates from him. So we are part of Krishna's potency, but he is the potent. The queens were also expansions of his internal potency, and thus the potent and potencies are perpetually exchanging transcendental pleasures known as pastimes of the Lord. So here the position of the queens are much superior, though they were all appearing in the material world. Actually, the pastimes which happen in Dwaraka in the material world, they are also happening in the spiritual world. But these elevated devotees who are qualified to become the queens of Krishna, they are actually part of his internal potency, meaning they are part of his spiritual energy. And that's why even in the spiritual world, they are part of the Goloka Dham, and they are also eternally existing there in the Dwaraka Dham of the spiritual world. So by attaining such elevated positions, they have become part of Krishna's internal potency. One should not therefore become astonished to learn that the Lord married so many wives. On the contrary, one should affirm that even if the Lord marries 16,000 million wives, he is not completely manifesting his unlimited and inexhaustible potency. He married only 16,000 wives and entered in each and every one of the different palaces just to impress in the history of the human beings on the surface of the earth that the Lord is never equal to or less than any human being, however powerful he may be. No one, therefore, is either equal to or greater than the Lord. The Lord is always great in all respects. God is great, is eternal truth. So, just like any king in this material world, he cannot stay in 2 palaces at the same time. Even if the king owns 10 palaces, he cannot stay there at the same time. But Krishna was able to reside in these 16,000 palaces and interact with his 16,000 queens simultaneously. So from the viewpoint of those queens, they were actually seeing Krishna face to face from their own palace. So that is the true opulence of the Supreme Lord. That's why he is known as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the non-devotees and the half-baked intellectuals can never understand these transcendental topics simply because they won't even endeavor to study from the authentic scriptures. So Krishna could have even expanded himself into 16,000 million forms, but it was not necessary, and none of the so-called mortal kings of this world, they cannot even think about expanding themselves into 16 forms. So the neither devotees nor non-devotees, they should view these transcendental topics from the mundane point of view of the material world. So this example of Krishna's Dwarka pastimes is just a simple illustration of how the entire picture is about how Krishna exhibited his all his 6 opulences, even when he was present in this material world. Another example could be like we know that even in Ramayana there was this Swayamvara episode. So it was a tradition where the princess would select the groom, but though the Swayamvara was attended by so many other princes from many other kingdoms, it was often not easy to impress the princess. So any king, even in this material world, he cannot simply have as many wives as he wishes, because the women may not find him attractive. But Krishna, being full in all opulences, wealth, strength, beauty, fame, knowledge, renunciation, so the queens of Dwarka, naturally being his topmost devotees, so they were attracted to him. And even in the spiritual world, there are descriptions from Brahma Samhita about how Krishna is served by Lakshmi Sahasrasata Sambrama Sevyamanam. There are hundreds and thousands of Lakshmis serving him in the spiritual world. So this topic related to this Dwarka pastime itself is just a very simple example to show how God is great, and how the Supreme Personality of Godhead, how Bhagavan is always full in all the opulences. So when we look at the so-called Bhagavans, the so-called Godmen who often proclaim to be Bhagavan or incarnation of Bhagavan, even their personal assistants, they cannot see his face for a very long period of time. So such fools, they don't even know what is the meaning of Bhagavan, as mentioned in the scriptures. So it is not so this criteria of Bhagavan, as highlighted by Parashara Muni, was actually exhibited by Krishna when he was present in the material world. So that's why no one should claim to be Bhagavan unless he can exhibit all these opulences in full. And this Dwaraka pastime of Krishna, where he was residing with his 16,000 queens, should not be viewed from the mundane viewpoint of the material world. Therefore, as soon as the queens saw from a distance their husband, who was away from home for long periods due to the battle of Kurukshetra, they all arose from the slumber of meditation and prepared to receive their most beloved. According to Yajnavalkya's religious injunctions, a woman whose husband is away from home should not take part in any social functions, should not decorate her body, should not laugh, and should not go to any relative's house in any circumstance. This is the vow of the ladies whose husbands are away from home. At the same time, it is also enjoined that a wife should never present herself before the husband in an unclean state. She must decorate herself with ornaments and good dress, and should always be present before the husband in a happy and joyous mood. the queens of Lord Krishna were all in meditation, thinking of the Lord's absence, and were always meditating upon him. So similar to the gopis of Vrindavan, even the queens of Dwarka, they were always meditating upon Krishna, even when he was away from them. Like in the case of the gopis of Vrindavan, ever since Krishna left Vrindavan to Mathura and then to Dwaraka, they hardly got any opportunity to see him, but they were always engaged in in meditating about him, meaning that though they were engaged in their material duties, they were still absorbed in his thoughts. So similarly, the queens of Dwaraka, though they were separated from Krishna when he left to Kurukshetra for the war, they were always in deep meditation about him. The Lord's devotees cannot live for a moment without meditating on the Lord, and what to speak of the queens, who are all goddesses of fortune, incarnated as queens in the pastimes of the Lord at Dwaraka. So this is the difference between those topmost devotees and other devotees like us, the less qualified ones or the less fortunate ones. These queens of Dwarka and even the gopis of Vrindavan, they were qualified to attain that exalted status. Even being devotees of Krishna, they managed to attain that exalted status of devotees, unlike us, because their level of bhakti is such that regardless of whether Krishna is with them or away from them, they'll always be deeply engaged in meditating about him. Though they do perform their other tasks, they cannot even live for a moment without thinking about Krishna. Unlike us in the material world, we think about God only when something bad happens to us. Whenever something good happens, whenever we achieve something, we rarely thank God for what had happened. We'll be so puffed up thinking that we achieved that success solely due to our own ability. So it is because of our ego. But whenever something goes wrong, then only then we'll start blaming God. So that's why even in Gita 7.16, Krishna talks about the 4 types of devotees. Chaturvida Bhajantema, Jana Sukirtana Arjuna, Artho Jignasu Artati, Jnani Cha Bhartarshava. So the 4 types of devotees: the one who is in distress, the one who seeks material wealth, and the one who is inquisitive, and the 4th category is the Jnani. So these topmost devotees, whether it's the queens of Dwarka or the gopis of Vrindavan, they clearly belong to the category of Jnanis, because they are the topmost and the most exalted devotees. After 7.16, in 7.17 and 7.18, Krishna also further clarifies that all the 4 categories of devotees are indeed Mahatmanas. Krishna says that all the 4 types of devotees are indeed dear to him, but the Jnani is the dearmost, because the Jnani, being the topmost devotee, he knows the absolute truth, and he does not think about Krishna merely to get some benefits. Like the gopis of Vrindavan and the queens of Dwarka, their only goal in life is to render service to Krishna. Unlike us in the material world, we only think about Krishna whenever we need some material benefits. So that is the difference between us and those exalted devotees. But in the Gita, Krishna actually reveals to us how we can even attain not their level, but still we can at least endeavor to follow their footsteps, because the jnani is the one who knows that the material benefits that we seek in this material world, they are all temporary and completely useless the moment we leave this body. So the ones who are in distress, even if they pray to Krishna, the moment their distress is over, they are going to forget Krishna for sure. And then even for those who seek material benefits, so for such people, they fail to understand that material wealth is also temporary. It is not going to remain forever. And we have clearly seen how so many developing nations, they had this so-called Vision 2020, and we all know what happened at the dawn of 2020. The problem started in December 2019, and we welcomed the dawn of 2020, and all those dreams were shattered. So now people are talking about Vision 2030, 2040, 2050. So that's how impermanent this so-called material progress is. But still, a lot of people fail to understand that. And even for an inquisitive person, the inquisitive person may or may not be a devotee, but the one who follows the proper path, he would eventually become a devotee. Even in the examples of Suta Goswami, he was also present when Shukadev Goswami spoke the Bhagavatam to Parikshit Maharaj. So he was able to, he sat there as an inquisitive devotee, and he was able to convey the knowledge to the sages of Naimisharanya. So being an inquisitive person is actually a better starting point towards becoming the topmost devotee, like a jnani. But if we are going to always pray to Krishna merely to get relief from distress or for material benefits, we'll always, though we are surrendering to him, though we are actually praying to him, but we can never get the proper solutions to our problem. Our biggest problem is that we are engaged in this material body. So as long as we do not liberate ourselves from this material bondage, our problems are going to keep repeating, regardless of the type of body that we attain. Today we are having this human form of life. So we are looking to gain material benefits in the form of a house, car, and other material benefits. But if we get the body of a dog or cat, even then our scope of material benefits will be like looking for food on the streets. So even the dogs and cats, they also have their material needs. So as long as we are engaged in all these 84 lakh material bodies, we can never solve our problems. So only the inquisitive person who approaches Krishna, at least as an inquisitive person, might become a jnani after knowing about the eternal truth, about the absolute truth. So that is the only way we could liberate ourselves from this material bondage. But in the case of these queens of Dwarka and even the gopis of Vrindavan, they have actually attained that status of a jnani. That's why they have attained that topmost position, and they think about nothing else apart from rendering service to Krishna. So their thoughts are always engaged in thinking about him, unlike us who only think about Krishna when we need something. So we should at least realize that we should actually follow their footsteps, though we can never attain their status, the level of devotion of the gopis of Vrindavan. So at least we can at least endeavor to follow their footsteps. By thinking thus, they were sometimes overwhelmed in trance and modified in the heart. Such is the condition of the pure associates of the Lord. They are always in trance, and so the queens were in trance during the absence of the Lord. Presently, having seen the Lord from a distance, they at once gave up all their engagements, including the vows of women as described above. So they were like when they were separated from the Lord, they were always in a very unkempt state. But out of eagerness to see Krishna, they were like actually rushing towards him without even getting ready, just out of their eagerness. According to Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, there was a regular psychological reaction on the occasion. First of all, rising from their seats. Although they wanted to see their husband, they were deterred because of feminine shyness. But due to strong ecstasy, they overcame that stage of weakness and became caught up with the idea of embracing the Lord. And this thought factually made them unconscious of their surrounding environment. Though they were in a very unkempt state, they were not even ready to appear in front of him, but they were so eager to meet him. So they simply rose up from their seats and they were rushing towards him out of that ecstasy after seeing him. This prime state of ecstasy annihilated all other formalities and social conventions, and thus they escaped all stumbling blocks on the path of meeting the Lord, and that is the perfect stage of meeting the Lord of the soul, Sri Krishna. Text 32. The inseparable ecstasy was so strong that the queens who were shy first embraced the Lord in the innermost recesses of their hearts. Then they embraced him visually, and then they sent their sons to embrace him, which is equal to personal embracing. But, O chief amongst the Brigus, though they try to restrain their feelings, they inadvertently shed tears. Although due to feminine shyness, there were many hindrances to embracing the dear husband, Lord Sri Krishna. The queens performed that act by seeing him, by putting him in the cause of their hearts, and by sending their sons to embrace him. Still, the act remained unfinished, and tears rolled down their cheeks despite all endeavors to check them. One indirectly embraces the husband by sending the son to embrace him because the son is developed as part of the mother's body. The embrace of the son is not exactly the embrace of husband and wife from the sexual point of view, but the embrace is satisfaction from the affectionate point of view. The embrace of the eyes is more effective in the conjugal relation, and thus, according to Srila Jiva Goswami, there is nothing wrong in such an exchange of feeling between husband and wife. So when we talk about the queens of Dwarka and also the gopis of Vrindavan, they were always engaged in this mellow, the rasa of conjugal love. As we know, there are 12 rasas, out of which there are 5 primary rasas and 7 secondary rasas. The 5 primary rasas, Santa, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya. So these queens of Dwaraka, they were always engaged in the rasa of Madhurya or conjugal love. And so all these descriptions, they talk about how they were able to exchange their feelings even when there was no physical interaction. So, okay, I think that's all for today. We'll continue text 33 on Tuesday. So that's all. Any questions or comments?
Everything is okay, Prabhu, right now.
Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.